What Euler does is it allows every market to be a vault. Anybody can create a vault in a permissionless manner, and a vault accepts assets. And you can connect these vaults to one another to allow lending and borrowing. And you can either do that in pairs, or you can extend a pair to add a third asset, or a fourth asset, or a fifth asset. You can start to build up clusters of vaults, all of which can lend and borrow from one another.
Welcome to the Edge Podcast. I'm DeFi Dad here with Nomadic from 4RC. Today's show spotlights the launch of Euler V2. In this episode, we learn about this newly engineered modular credit layer, what new innovations it offers, and why we're excited for what this brings to DeFi lending and borrowing. But before we do, just a quick word from our sponsors who make the Edge Podcast possible. Discover MERLIN Chain, the cutting-edge Bitcoin Layer 2, trusted with over $2 billion in total value locked. MERLIN revolutionizes Bitcoin by unlocking its true potential with native L1 assets, lightning-fast transactions, and ultra-low fees on an EVM-compatible network. Elevate your Bitcoin experience with MERLIN Chain today at merlinchain.io. Power up your portfolio by borrowing, lending, and multiplying your favorite assets, made safe and easy by the industry-leading automation tools at SUMMER.FI. SUMMER.FI offers a curated DeFi experience to access the highest quality protocols and strategies. Discover new earn strategies for your portfolio in a user-friendly app designed to filter based on the tokens you hold, the networks you transact on, the protocols you trust, and the highest available yields. Learn more today at SUMMER.FI, the best place to borrow and earn in DeFi. Tired of hopping between tabs, searching for new tokens before the hype catches on? Try MATCHA.XYZ, the DEX aggregator from 0x. Matcha connects hundreds of DEXs so you can trade millions of tokens and find fresh new drops. Matcha works out the best route to save you money on every trade. Swaps are free, and Matcha has everything you need to trade on-chain. Gasless swaps, limit orders, and cross-chain, all in one place. Search Trade Done at matcha.xyz. Catch the tide of the mainnet launch of Puffer Finance. Whether you're an Ethereum staker or an aspiring node operator, Puffer delivers the decentralization revolution with its cutting-edge technology. Start with just 2 ETH to unlock the potential of native liquid restaking and maximize your earnings. Join the movement now and anchor your stake at puffer.fi. All right, let's introduce Michael Bentley, CEO of Euler Labs. Michael, welcome to the Edge Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So we're recording this in advance of the launch of Euler V2. So if you're listening to this, the newest version of Euler should be available. And if you've been around DeFi for the last few years, Euler, has stood as one of the major lending and borrowing platforms. Some of us would call that a money market. And so we're excited just for this new modular credit layer. Michael's going to explain to us what exactly that means and what is new in V2. So, Michael, why don't you kick us off with a little bit about like the genesis of Euler? Like, can you just kind of talk us through like what prompted you to build it and some of the innovations you brought about with V1?
Yeah, I mean, Euler started in 2020 during the height of DeFi summer. People might remember back then there was a global pandemic. So around that time, I was expecting my first child, and I was participating in hackathons. I'd been in crypto for quite a while. I'd been building bits and pieces here and there, and I stumbled on this idea of trying to build a way to decentralize the way that interest rates are formed in lending protocols. I really liked Compound. Had just sort of emerged. Was gaining a lot of traction. Obviously, Maker had been around for a while at that point, and Uniswap was really sort of gaining popularity in that time, and other projects like Yearn. So I really wanted to get involved somehow, and I realized that I could apply some of the mathematics I used to use in my day job as a researcher to the space in a way that might be able to decentralize the way that interest rates are formed. So yeah, participated in this hackathon. I called this reactive interest rates. We ended up winning the hackathon, myself and my co-founder Doug. And from there, things quickly spiraled into like, can we turn this into a bona fide project? And we started working on all sorts of other innovations that we thought could help improve the lending space at the time. So yeah, some of our key areas of focus were around permissionlessness. That's a nice word, isn't it? Trying to allow people to spin up their own markets. At the time, Compound and Aave were sort of very, very popular at the time. They're these big monolithic lending protocols that really captured the short tail of the market. There's lots of other possible ways to lend and borrow assets, with like higher or lower risk than you can find on those markets, different types of assets, all this other good stuff. And we wanted to see if we could extend the offerings around that time to new markets. And so that was one of the key challenges that Euler tackled. But we had loads of other great stuff with Euler V1 as well. It was very advanced. I suppose it was like very popular among traders and real crypto native types. We had a lot of features on the UI that would resemble what some people might know as like account abstraction today. So you could batch transactions up together. You could put on really complex trade types and so on. There's a lot of really good stuff in that.
Michael, so with Euler V1, you had an unfortunate flash loan attack. I think it was for 197 million. To my knowledge, I think all the funds in that were recovered. I've found that kind of founders and protocols that go through this process, it sometimes creates like a hardening effect. I'm not sure this applies to everybody, but maybe just kind of give us some insights and takeaways from. Of course, you probably don't want to relive it, but I'm sure this was probably an amazing learning experience. Just give us some of those insights and takeaways that you learned from this.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really, really, really difficult time. There were a lot of people that lost initially a lot of money in that period. Of course, it's really difficult for all the users, really difficult for the team as well. I mean, Euler V1 was extremely heavily audited, and we've been really slow to take it to market very slowly because we've been building it very thoughtfully and carefully. So famously, we'd taken security really seriously, and it turned out that there was still a way to exploit the protocol. So the way it emerged actually is kind of interesting. Was that there's a much smaller. We had a very big, extensive bug bounty campaign, of course, with V1, and somebody came and reported a much smaller bug around a year before the exploit. Which we consulted with our security partners. They said, yeah, this is a bug. It would, in some rare circumstances, allow a very small amount of user funds to be taken, so it probably should be fixed. So we fixed it. We had the fix audited, and it turns out, unfortunately, that fix was, as simple as it was, had actually introduced a much, much larger vulnerability in the protocol. And so a year later, that's what happened. Somebody exploited that vulnerability to essentially drain the entire protocol of all its funds. It happened 4 days after the birth of my son, which is really, really horrific timing. So I was actually about to go on paternity leave. It was also the same weekend that people might remember the USDC depeg incident with banking issues in the US. So it was a really, really, really good time for something like that to happen. And but over the course of several weeks, I think one of the things we really learned as a team is firstly that we were resilient and that we were a really good group of people. There was no finger pointing. We immediately just got together as a group and said, like, well, how do we fix this? Like, what can we do to fix this? And you learn a lot about yourself and your own resilience, and what you put into this. You wait 20 hours a day for weeks on end. And a talented team like ours, when it all collaborates and puts its mind together, can achieve really significant things. And we were able to recover all of the funds, compel the attacker to give those funds back ultimately. And around 6 weeks afterwards, with a lot of drama in between. If people are interested in the story, I wrote this blog post called War and Peace about the whole incident. It was absolutely wild. North Korea got involved at one point, and it was just really, really crazy. 6 weeks later, it was all kind of over, and that's that was March 2023. So we're well over a year on from now, and it's kind of ancient history. And I think as a group, we're all here still with the same beliefs, even more resilient and sort of hardened, as you said, than we were first time around, and determined to make a success of things.
I remember that time as well, and I remember hearing this story about your son, Lunaterra. Hopefully Lunaterra Bentley is just doing so much better. now. It was such a crazy story, yeah, because we knew you had just had a son, and what a disruption that would have been. For what it's worth, Michael, I've never lived through an exploit of a protocol days after a child being born, but I swear to you, Nomadic can attest to this. Anytime I go on vacation, markets crash. If I fly, they crash really hard. They'll crash double digits. But if I do something like I went to a Red Sox game the other night, the market, I think, crashed about, let's say, like 10% on average. It's like someone is watching and waiting, like when will he move away from his computer long enough for us to cause, maximum pain? Yeah,
I've learned that I just can't have any more children. My daughter was born around a month after the pandemic started. So she's basically to blame for the pandemic. And my son is to blame for, the collapse of USDC and the Euler exploit. So yeah, no more children for us.
At least we can all laugh about it now. I've got friends who will tell me how stressed out they are with work. And I'm like, you don't even want to hear me tell you the stories. And actually, the silver lining to all of this is I feel like, yeah, we've all been sort of hardened over the years. You have obviously a better story to tell there, just with the funds being, returned to users. So moving forward, though, obviously today, this podcast is about V2. I think one of the lessons you mentioned there, from all of this is just, how can we be that much more thorough with audits? I mean, based on what I've been able to understand about Euler V2, I mean, it looks like you have one of the most expansive audits going on, of all the different DeFi protocols we've seen launched. So I guess what else can you share about that process and how you're building or repairing that trust with the community?
Yeah, I mean, you can never do enough, right? That's it's very, very difficult. We work in this nascent industry that's only been around a few years. People forget that, right? It's very difficult to when you start to build a completely new thing that's never been seen before in the world, like a new car or planes or whatever, new technologies. They take a while. There are lots of teething issues, and I think a lot of projects have found that. I think. Say it quietly, but I do think things are improving significantly in the space as a whole. And you can see an evolution from the security processes we applied to V1 now through to V2. And we've done everything that we did before and a whole lot more on top the second time around as well. Really, I mean, there's a lot to go through here. It's a really comprehensive process. We wrote a blog post about it called Securing Euler, if anyone wants to read it, about what goes into this because it's really detailed. But essentially it starts from the design of the protocol and its components. We've called it a modular lending protocol because we believe that modularity is a more secure way to build things than building big complex products from the outset. Build simple components that are easy to test and that just do one or a very small number of things that are easy to understand, and then compose them with one another. But beyond that, we've involved security researchers from a wide variety of different backgrounds and disciplines in the process, merely from the early stages. So it's not just about building the protocol and then shipping it out to auditors and expecting it back a few weeks later and launching. The first security work that we consulted on started in October last year. It's a year ago before launch, pretty much, was when the security folks really started getting involved, and we've had formal verification from Satora. We've done fuzz testing. We've had really top auditors come in and do threat modeling. Ex-protocol designers from other lending protocols come in and give us their thoughts on just the architecture and design. We've had launched the largest ever community audit competition on Cantina. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's changed in the industry as a whole is the emergence of audit competitions, which I think are a massive, massive benefit to the ecosystem. We launched the largest one of those ever. That finished a few weeks ago. Thankfully, after all the security work we've done, we were delighted to discover that with 1.25 million on offer for the researchers to claim there were no medium or even no high or even medium severity issues remaining in the code in the competition. I think there were hundreds and hundreds of participants in that. So yeah, we've done a huge amount. It's been very, very thorough. It's been very comprehensive. It's been expensive and it's taken a long time, but it's been worth it.
Yeah, nicely done. Michael, maybe before we even get further into V2, I would just kind of like your, I guess, take on the current landscape of the lending market space. Like, what have you felt is missing in the space? What does it need to, like, what's holding it back, essentially?
I think there's lots of things, really. I mean, we're nowhere close to a final, like an end state of what DeFi lending and borrowing looks like. I mean, if you look at the traditional finance world, there's all sorts of different markets for lending and borrowing assets, over collateralized or under collateralized. There are all sorts of different participants offering specialized products with all sorts of diverse risk reward opportunities on offer, and that's just not the case in DeFi today. Frankly, you essentially have a couple of major players that dominate the space, and they have some really nice products that have kind of captured that. But there's not much for people to do outside of those players. You can't access higher risk, higher yielding opportunities than you can on some of the competitors out there. You can't access lower risk, lower yielding opportunities. There's all sorts of assets that aren't serviced. There's the short tail is relatively well covered in certain kinds of markets, but beyond that, we're still lacking from that original vision we set out with it. Back in building Euler V1, there are all sorts of NFTs, financialized NFTs. There are real world assets coming on chain that have unique properties that need to be dealt with. I think we're just on the cusp of a massive wave of innovation, hopefully starting with Euler V2, but lots of other projects too that will help diversify and expand what we have today.
So, Michael, you and the team have been incubating this for some time. Can we start to dig into what is this high level vision for Euler V2? Most importantly, I want to understand what are the bigger foundational changes that you're bringing to the table?
Yeah, so Euler V1 was what I call a monolithic lending protocol. It was a product with a single market for every type of asset. So there would be a single market for USDC, for instance, single market for USDC, single market for Bitcoin, and the assets would all be grouped together in a monolith. The nice thing about monoliths like Aave and like Euler V1, like Compound V2, is that they're capital efficient. You kind of group the assets together and they can all cross borrow from one another. You can use USDC to borrow anything else in the protocol. The downside of those markets is that there's only a single interest rate for each asset, and you have to define what's called a loan to value parameter, which kind of captures the extent to which a given market carries risk for every asset, and then that loan to value has to apply for everything else in the monolith, and that really restricts what you can do. It forces you into taking on a really sort of conservative state, because protocol as a whole is only as strong as its weakest collateral asset. And so monoliths benefit from being somewhat capital efficient because they can aggregate many assets inside a single protocol, but they struggle with being able to offer different types of rates, risk reward opportunities to use it, and to be able to service all sorts of different kinds of assets. So that's monoliths. If you look at the other side of the market, there've been attempts to kind of break free from this, but what they usually involve is fragmenting liquidity. Usually you have pairs of assets, so you just have one asset that serves as collateral, another asset that you can borrow using that collateral, and then you just get a really big long list of pairs. And with that, what's nice is that each pair by itself is isolated, and so it doesn't, if something goes wrong with a loan, it affects the users in that isolated pair, but it doesn't spill over into all the other pairs usually. So you isolate risk, which is great, but now you've got real problems with capital efficiency. The liquidity is fragmented. It's not just fragmented for the lenders, but it's also fragmented for the borrowers. If you've got 10 different USDC markets rather than one USDC market, you've divided that liquidity into 10 pieces, and that means that each market is now less liquid, which means the rates are probably more volatile. a single user withdrawing from a pool like that can massively spike rates. Borrowers like, this is annoying, I've got to move pools. So everything just needs actively managing way much more when you have like fragmented liquidity like that. But if you think about it, there's lots of different models in between the pairs, the isolated pairs, and then a single big monolith. There's a whole space in between that generally hasn't been widely explored. There's been a few protocols that have sort of dabbled in that. I'll call like Silo Out is one that I like, that kind of extends the pair model a little bit, but the huge design space in the middle, and that's where Euler comes in. What Euler does is it allows every market to be a vault. Anybody can create a vault in a permissionless manner, and a vault accepts assets. And you can connect these vaults to one another to allow lending and borrowing. And you can either do that in pairs, or you can extend a pair to add a third asset, or a fourth asset, or a fifth asset. You can start to build up clusters of vaults, all of which can lend and borrow from one another. And then you can optionally, if you want, connect your cluster of assets to another cluster of assets. So, if DeFi Dad here has got his little cluster, I can create my own little cluster, and I can say, I think his cluster of 3 vaults is so well managed. It's really got a nice setup. I'm going to accept as collateral his vaults. So, say yours just a little stable coin cluster. I can now choose to accept that as collateral, which means for you and your users within your vaults, you've added no risk there. We're just giving them extra utility, right? The fact that they can now use those assets in their mini cluster as collateral for something else is just added utility. For my vaults over here, I've now gained an extra set of potential collateral, and the more collateral the more types of collateral you can accept, the more likely you are to find borrowers who possess that collateral and can borrow, which brings more liquidity. And so you get these really nice positive growth effects and network effects here, where people create vaults. If they're nicely configured vaults, people will accept them as collateral. That brings more deposits. With more deposits brings more liquidity, which means it's even more useful as collateral, which means somebody else deploying another vault will accept it as collateral, and so on. With this model, we really think we can completely transform the landscape for lending and borrowing, because we get the benefits of risk isolation where people want it, but also capital efficiency where people want it. And it's all about letting your users choose. The idea is to be permissionless here. You can have 10 different USDC markets if you want, but it's up to the users to choose. Do they want to accept lots of different types of collateral with high loan to value parameters that increase risk and reward, or do they just want to keep it in pairs? It's totally up to them. So it's up to the users to decide, and we think it's going to bring a whole wave of innovation and fill that gap between monolith and isolated pairs.
Michael, I'm just going to throw a few things back at you to just kind of reiterate what you went through. So what I'm hearing is this, basically this development kit that you've made almost gives users this power of using no code building blocks to build their own vaults. And it almost creates this UGC effect where vault builders kind of build for others as well. So I guess talented vault builders can then have their vaults used as collateral for other users, essentially. Is that right? Where, Euler itself doesn't have to build or dictate all the design implementation here. You're kind of handing it over in some way to talented community operators to just, I guess, kind of, go creatively wherever they want in some cases, because it's permissionless. So in a document that you gave us beforehand, I saw that there's 4 types of vaults. Maybe we can just kind of quickly address those archetypes of these vaults. They're ERC 4626 vaults. And maybe just kind of run through them quickly. If you know what I'm referring to, they're the escrowed collateral, governed, ungoverned, yield aggregator. I probably don't need to tell you what they are.
Yeah, I'll go through the types quickly. I mean, the first thing to say is they're kind of artificial, right? Because the actual development kit for a vault is extremely flexible. We've been agnostic in building this about pretty much everything. So you can add governance or no governance, upgradability, no upgradability, different Oracle types, different interest rate models. They're very, very customizable, flexible pieces of kit. That's all thanks to the modularity, right? You build little modules and then you compose them together and you can build products out of them. So a vault can be a very heavily specified and well-designed product that can handle all sorts of different asset types, all sorts of different configurations. However, there's obviously going to be sort of shelling points for vaults, like customizations, which kind of people like and get used to. And so we've created these 4 classes, which can be, the classes themselves are just like common customizations we think people want, and those customizations can be verified at the smart contract level, but a vault conforms to a particular standard. So like almost like a token class, I suppose. Now I think about it, like you'd say, oh yeah, that's an ERC20 because it has this specification, right? And you can verify its properties. So these vault classes we've got, we call them escrow collateral. It's essentially a vault which just takes deposits, and then that vault, it doesn't allow anybody to borrow from the vault, so the assets are just held there. They're escrowed. If you've ever, in the US, they talk about holding assets in escrow when you're buying a house or whatever. So they're just escrowed. They're held inside this vault, but then that vault itself is the thing that's acting as collateral for taking out a loan. So if DeFi Dad here has another vault, he can choose to accept some of these escrowed collateral vaults as collateral for borrowing from his vault. And the nice thing about these vaults is that the assets are always in there. If you ever want to liquidate a loan or liquidate somebody, that they're not going anywhere, right? They're completely held until either they get liquidated or the borrower chooses to repay their loan. So they come with extra security properties. However, they are somewhat capital inefficient, because if you're just escrowing these assets and not doing anything with them, like you're wasting opportunities to earn yield on them and so on. And that's typically not how things work in DeFi, right? They do on Morpho Blue vaults or what we would call escrowed collateral in the collateral set. But if you go to Aave and you deposit USDC and use it as collateral to borrow Bitcoin, the USDC earns you yield, right? And that's nice. I think a lot of people prefer that. They're happy to take on a bit of extra risk by lending those assets out whilst they're using them as the collateral. So the additional vault types are all focused around this. We have ungoverned vaults, which essentially allow you to use assets in a vault as collateral, and they allow you to lend them out at the same time. So you can earn additional yield on them. And crucially, these vaults don't have any governor. So the parameterizations for the risk setup is fixed by the vault creator at the time they're set up. And they're really useful, I think, for people who are comfortable actively managing their own risk. So that the parameters are fixed. If the economic environment changes, no one's going to look after you. No one's going to hold your hand with this paternalistic model of governance, right? It's not going to happen. So you can actively manage your own risk directly like withdrawing or depositing into these vaults to earn yield. I think there's something nice about that model and being able to access a diverse set of opportunities and manage your own risk in that way, but it's not for everybody. So we also have governed vaults. Governed vaults operate similar to the way that, I guess, lending and borrowing happens on something like Aave, where you have an active governor who tends to carry out risk management responsibilities for the assets in a vault as well. So if the economic environment deteriorates, they might change the types of collateral that are accepted, or lower collateral factors or loan to value factors on a vault, so that they kind of lower the exposure to risk in the vault. And these are useful for people who are more comfortable being looked after, right? They don't want to actively manage and dip in and out of vaults all the time. They want to entrust somebody with more expertise than themselves in risk management to kind of carry out these risk management activities. We've done escrow collateral, ungoverned, governed, and now we've got the yield aggregation vaults. What are these for? Well, these are also for passive depositors. You deposit into a yield aggregator, and a governor of the yield aggregator will now essentially take the assets of anybody that's deployed into it. So the assets are aggregated, and then the governor is the one who's going to now deposit assets into all sorts of different types of vaults. And if the risk environment changes, they don't actively change risk parameters on the vault itself. What they do is they change the flows into these different underlying vaults. So if the risk environment deteriorates, they might take the assets out of a bunch of very risk-on ungoverned vaults and deploy them into some lower risk ungoverned vaults, or they might deploy them into SDI or whatever. The yield aggregator vault is kind of similar to what Yearn does, but it has this extra risk management element encapsulated within it. It's not just about optimizing yield; it's about optimizing risk-adjusted yield. Within the marketplace. So that's the four classes we've got, broadly speaking, at launch. But beyond that, if you're an advanced user, you can go on and do all sorts of crazy customizations as well.
Michael, I think you answered my question right at the end there. I was curious for that yield aggregator vault, what dictates the flow of funds? So I think you just mentioned it's basically a risk-adjusted return. It's not just like risk level, it's not just yield level, it's a combination of both. It'll make that decision and kind of dictate the flow of funds. And then one other just question on that is this just a yield aggregator for Euler V2 vaults, or you're not going to other protocols with this yield aggregator, correct?
Yeah, no, you can use it for anything really. I mean, we always take this very free market philosophy when we build stuff at Euler. We try, we don't have liquidation fees on things. We try to keep fees relatively low because we sort of believe that you capture value as a whole by growing the market and growing your user base rather than trying to extract value from everybody at every single point in the flow. And I think it's kind of artificial if you take a yield aggregate and say, oh, but you have to use Euler vaults. It's like, well, that might not be the best thing to do, right? There's SDI out there and lots of other ERC 4626 vaults, which are really cool and that provide yield opportunities. So actually, we let people deploy into Euler and they're kind of custom built to work with Euler. But, if you want to use other protocols and then yield from those, you're welcome to as well. Ultimately, it's likely that people will come to the Euler interface at the very least to use these vaults. And at least some of the time they'll be depositing into Euler. I think that's a value add that's enough for us. The person who creates a yield aggregator vault keeps 100% of the fees on them as well. So essentially, we think they're the ones that are earning the fees, right? They're carrying out the risk management of the flows of the aggregated funds. So they're the one providing the real value. And if Euler's to benefit, it benefits more from those flows and just from the network effects of having users with more options essentially on the platform.
Before we get back to the show, just a quick thanks to our sponsor at Mantle Network, the layer 2 that pioneered the 5th largest LST with 1.6 billion TVL called MATCHA. Since July 1st, Mantle is running a 100-day airdrop campaign called Metamorphosis to distribute a new governance token for the Mantle liquid staking protocol called Cook. The community can earn points for Cook called Powder by holding METH in Metamorphosis and simultaneously enjoying other yield and reward opportunities in the Mantle ecosystem. Users can also earn Powder by staking MNT in the Mantle Rewards Station. For more details, go to the Mantle blog at mantle.xyz/blog and follow the 0xmantle handle on Twitter for more updates. Just first off, I want to express how mind blown I am by this V2. It feels like you're just further refining what we know as lending and borrowing markets, giving that much more control. It's really refreshing too, because obviously there's a lot of degeneracy in the space, and this is the kind of stuff Nomadic and I talk about. There's just a lot of fundamental developments that are happening, but it takes time for really powerful things to be built. In going with that, some of the features you're calling out and just letting listeners, viewers know, we haven't seen what the future user interface looks like. So, a lot of this is just totally new to us still. But you mentioned how, we might react to that new UI. So can you draw lines between Euler V2 and maybe some of the features or benefits we know in a Morpho or maybe Aave V3 or Fluid by Instadap or even Silo? It feels like there's clearly going to be some features that we enjoy in some of these other protocols in some format here in Euler V2.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's the similarities with all of them. I say that the Vault Kit is flexible enough to rebuild all of those protocols, essentially. So you can rebuild them, and the really cool thing is that underlying everything we've built, we have this one module called the Ethereum Vault Connector, And guess what? It connects vaults together. And what that enables you to do is to build entire lending protocols essentially, and then connect them to one another. So like users might remember back in the day, there was a protocol called Rari Fuse, where essentially what they would do is they'd take Compound, one of the early Compound deployments, and they'd fork it, and they'd let users fork it over and over again, and have they had multiple different Compound deployments, each with different configurations and so on. And it had some product market fit, actually. It serviced some certain niches in the market that weren't being serviced at the time. Ultimate also suffered from some security issues, but it was an interesting experiment. And one of the things that was unfortunate about it, though, is that Compound wasn't set up to do that, right? And then the Compound instances, these different forks, they couldn't talk to one another. And that's what one of the things that's unique about Euler is that you can remake a kind of Morpho or a Silo or a whole Aave if you want. I think it'd be really funny actually just to kind of remake Aave on Euler and then like hook it up to a bunch of Morpho markets and a bunch of, you can do all this and then connect them all to one another, let them talk to one another and accept one another as collateral. So it's very, very flexible. In that sense, you can rebuild any kind of lending protocol you like that's on the market today, I think. But yeah, there are bits that I think of those protocols you mentioned that kind of will be familiar to people. The yield aggregator vaults, for instance, are kind of similar in some ways to the Metamorpho system. They take this philosophy of a different approach to risk management in the market, where you have like an immutable base, essentially that doesn't have direct governance over it. So the ungoverned vaults, for instance, and then rather than changing parameters, you have the yield aggregator changing flows into different types of vaults, which allows passive lending without having to be exposed to governance of risk management by like a DAO, for instance. Some people don't like that. I think that's one of the things that's been difficult in the market is DAO governance over risk management. So people are still learning how to do that correctly. So if we look at Silo, one of the nice things about Silo, just if people aren't familiar with this, how it works, which I think is very cool, is in Silo everything comes in pairs. So supposing you had like pairs A and B, and then you had a pair B and C. Now imagine you wanted to use A as collateral to borrow C. What you would do is essentially you would use A to borrow B, and then use B, deposit into the other pair, and use B to borrow C. And so with that, you can essentially borrow C using A, even though there's no market for direct market between A and C. So that's their model. And Euler essentially extends that massively, right? Because now rather than just two assets, you can have 3 or 4, you can have N vault clusters. It kind of abstracts that completely. And then you can build things like Aave as well if you want governance. And I think we've heard from a whole bunch of risk managers and risk curators out there that are really interested in building governed like clusters of vaults. And the goal with these, I think we're going to see people building their own clusters that are really tailor made for specific markets. Aave is really aimed at everybody, right? So they've tried to be as generalist as possible with the short-term assets, but they have maybe, there's not that specialism in certain asset classes. We've started to see that now. I think Aave just recently created like a second Aave instance with wrap stake ETH and ETH. And it's completely separate deployment to the main thing that people know as Aave V3. But yeah, you can imagine there being multiple Aaves, one for stable coins. You can have like a really low risk stable coin cluster, a high risk stable coin cluster, a permission stable coin cluster. All of those things would be possible with Euler, and then you could connect them to one another. And the nice thing I think about that ability to connect things to one another is that if you're building a cluster out here and there's some really low risk set of vaults over here somewhere else in the ecosystem, it usually pays for you to accept those vaults as collateral because they're lower risks than the thing you're building, and it brings you instant like availability of users. Right, immediately you get some potential target audience where people can use those assets as collateral to borrow from your vault. So yeah, there's everything you know and love about existing protocols, and then a whole lot more on top.
When V2 is launched, Do we know which tokens that will be able to lend or collateralize versus borrow on day one?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a short answer and then a long answer. The short answer is that at launch, the code, if you deploy the classes of vaults we discussed earlier, supports 4 Oracle types. And those Oracle types are really the thing that constrains what assets can be used within the system that you can create vaults for. So we have Chainlink, of course, who've done a fantastic job securing Euler V1 and the dominant player in the space. But we've also got newer Oracle providers, including Pith, Redstone, and Chronicle, who will add diversity to that set. Obviously Euler as a kit is kind of agnostic. Each Oracle type, each Oracle provider comes with trade-offs. There's different approaches to the technology there, but yeah, they with those 4, they service a very large number of assets, much larger than anything you'd find on most lending protocols today. So there'll be a huge amount of flexibility there. I think there'll be 150 different assets that you can use the kit with to create the classes of vaults we discussed earlier. And ultimately, if those oracles don't support your needs, you can also go away and build or tap into other Oracle types out there. There are some really nice ones in DeFi. I think like some of the Curve oracles are now gaining a bit of Lindy. Like people are starting to trust the Curve oracle system a bit more. So that might be an interesting extension. If we go really far out, there's even Oracle-free solutions or alternative to oracles entirely that you could build a custom vault for. So the sky's the limit in the long run, but in the short term, that's what we're supporting on mainnet launch.
Michael, is there anything that you're thinking of that you really want to see be built on top of Euler V2 that maybe is like a new thing or doesn't exist in the market currently because of limitations? Just any sort of thing that you're hoping somebody builds?
I do know of some secret projects that are being built. I'm very excited to see go live. I can't tell you too much about them, but maybe can I give some hints? So there's some like additional security, new ways to secure DeFi protocols, essentially. So somebody working on that. There's a very, very talented team, very experienced, that I think is going to add a lot of value and open up more opportunities, maybe with institutions who are very, very cautious and they like to sacrifice a little bit of. They're happy to sacrifice a little bit of sort of decentralization in order for more security. So there's somebody working on something like that. There's somebody building something that will allow you to compose Euler with or their thing, in fact, with other lending protocols in some really interesting ways that will allow completely new types of trades to take place. And then we have users building solutions that will open up new markets for real world assets and traditional finance type assets. So there's some of this requires modifications to the base vaults, but other things can actually just be built with the vault kit itself. There are these. We've not talked about them in too much detail, but there are these hooks that you can use. People might know about Uniswap V4 and its hooks. So essentially a hook just is a bit of code that you can call before or after certain events, like before or after you deposit into a vault, for instance. And with a hook, you can go away and execute other arbitrary code. And so that code can sometimes do really cool stuff. So some of the innovations happening around there. So if anybody's interested in getting involved in, or has been developing hooks for Uniswap, they might also want to look into, can they do cool stuff by developing novel hooks and novel applications with Euler's hooks.
At Moonbeam, we're building a world where the wonders of decentralized technology are accessible to everyone. We're advancing Web3 integration through product enhancements, funding for innovation, and investment in our partner ecosystem. Our product roadmap includes ZK initiatives, tokenomics updates, and 8x throughput. Our $10 million innovation fund invests in startups that deliver cutting-edge solutions for RWAs and Web3 gaming, and our partner ecosystem continues to grow through grants and incentives. Moonbeams is delivering frictionless user and builder experiences to create the future of the internet on-chain. Join us by participating in the Moonrise campaign today.
One other thing I want to ask you about is just about the Euler token itself. A lot of new protocols have this benefit of coming to market with a new flashy token and utilize it to kind of solve that cold start problem. Whether people agree that it's actually works or is helpful, that's up for debate maybe. But I think it does drive people initially, get some attention. It's up to the app or the protocol to make that attention sticky. But how are you thinking through this relaunch of Euler V2? With your token already live, what's your strategy here to bring attention and bring eyeballs? I mean, it sounds like the tech is good, but is that enough?
Yeah, it's a good question. Is it? They do help get over this cold start problem. Like a launch of a token where you can kind of bring on board users. There's always a bit of risk with using a new protocol. So when you want to kind of incentivize people, why would you leave Aave for Euler if there's nothing that you can't just build something 10% better than Aave. You have to really build something that's way better than Aave to bring in users in some sense. And sometimes you can do that by get over that 10% hurdle by just chucking tokens at it. With us, we've really tried to go beyond that 10% with the tech, and hopefully people will see that. So I think fundamentally, as you said, the tech is good, and that's the one go-to-market strategy is just build good shit. Beyond that though, we've got a couple of other innovations I'll quickly tell you about that I think are kind of relevant here. One is the ability for people to incentivize markets themselves on Euler. So the vault creators, they earn a share of the fees on their vault. So people are incentivized to build really nicely configured vaults that bring users themselves. And often that's good because they bring their network as well. Like we as a team can't possibly go out there and speak to every hedge fund, every DeFi fund, every possible user. I've barely spent any time in Asia. It's just very, very difficult to go out and do all that business development for a new protocol. Whereas if you let people build their own stuff, they can tap into their networks and source funds. They can do the grassroots marketing. They can supply their own liquidity to make things useful because they're going to benefit and earn a share of the fees. So letting users earn a share of the fees is a big part of this. Within the vaults themselves, we've baked in the synthetic staking logic that many people, I'm sure, will be familiar with. If you've ever staked in something in DeFi, you probably use synthetic staking algorithm. Dan Robinson, from Paradigm, calls it the $1 billion algorithm because it was one of the big things that helped DeFi grow. The problem with staking, though, is that you'd have to take an LP token usually from Uniswap or Aave or whatever, and you have to put it in a staking contract. Once it's in there, yes, you're staking and earning something, but you're not doing anything else with it. So it's kind of capital inefficient. You can't borrow against it. You can't do stuff that you would normally want to do with that LP token. So we basically baked that staking logic into the vaults themselves. And what that means is that you can stake and be lending at the same time. And if you do, a looped trade, you will have looped amounts of tokens, and therefore you'll be looping the stake as well as the yield that you're earning from lending. So anybody can incentivize a vault. Anybody can, in a permissionless manner, throw incentives at a vault. And I think a lot of projects that want to build, new markets for assets that aren't serviced by competitors right now will probably do this. And as a user, then, if you're involved in this vault, you don't have to receive rewards. Sometimes you might not want to for a variety of reasons, but if you do, you can just opt in. One transaction, and essentially you switch on staking for that asset, and then you'll be earning rewards. So, yeah, we are empowering the vault creators to essentially make money and to bring their network, and then to bring incentives themselves. So that's got nothing to do with Euler token. Where does Euler token come in? Another thing that we wanted to change was the way that the utility of the token. Euler V1 was used Euler as a governance token, and wanted to see if we could innovate there and bring more utility to the token. So we did so with another system that I want to tell you about, which is a way to figure out what you do with fees on the platform. When you're a protocol like Uniswap or Euler, and you've got the fees are coming in all sorts of different currencies. No sane business would normally hold all those hundreds of currencies on its balance sheet. Usually it would convert them into one or a small number of sane assets like dollars or euros or pounds or whatever. But how do you do that for a decentralized protocol? It's you don't want some guy like just going clicking buttons, like claiming fees from every vault, every day, going in, knocking on the door and asking for the fees. How do you get the fees and convert them into something that's useful for the DAO? Essentially, we invented a system, a permissionless auction system that's a recurring Dutch auction on every vault. Within the whole ecosystem, every few weeks, all the fees are essentially auctioned off. And what happens with this auction is that the fees start to accumulate. So they start at zero and they start rising. We start the price of the auction higher, and the price starts to fall. And of course, like if the fees are worth less than the price of the auction, no one's incentivized to buy them. But at some point, they cross over. At the point they cross over, the fees are worth more than the auction price. Anybody can go and claim those fees in a permissionless manner. The way that they do that is that they have to use an auction currency to claim those fees. And the auction currency that we're launching with on Euler is Euler token. So you need Euler tokens to be able to participate in the auction to claim fees on the protocol. I think it's... there's some innovations there around the token itself, and then obviously, the mechanisms I discussed to attract users, and then just the tech itself. But we tried to avoid, too many shenanigans and so on with go-to-market. There's going to be points. I think the Euler Foundation have proposed a points-based system as well, so people can get experience points. If you come and use the protocol, you can accrue these experience points and potentially get rewarded in the future for those. And that's it.
Once this is live then, Michael, like, will we see those points just like accruing on the dashboard? Like, I assume you'll have like a ticker or something there for points next to our wallet.
Yeah, essentially the points, or at least the proposal now is for the points to accrue to people who deposit ETH and USDC in the protocol. And so if you're a deployer into the one of the 4 vault types we mentioned earlier, you can't just create any old weird vault and accrue points. Unfortunately, it has to be a sort of verified, smart contract verified class of vault. But within that sort of constraint, any depositors of ETH or USDC can start accruing points. There'll be a leaderboard on the website where people can compare their experience points to other users on the platform. And there's also going to be some experience points for vault creators as well. Different types of points, so they're not fungible. You can't exchange a vault creator point for a liquidity provider point, as it were. But that's the other thing, right? It's important to see people and incentivize people to come and play around, deploy some vaults. It's there's going to be a vault kit, a vault creation website, which people can use. And I think it's very, very fun to come and deploy a vault, even if it's not something you've maybe thought about before. I think it's kind of interesting to go and do and carry out the exercise. And if you create a really nice vault that ends up delivering value to users, then it'll accrue liquidity, and ultimately that will bring you experience points as a vault creator as well.
I personally want to check out the vault creation. I have not thought of that prior to this, but it's something that sounds just really interesting. Also, super excited for other protocols, other like product builders out there, what they're going to build on Euler V2. I know we've done podcasts with Contango, who does like looping strategies, or basically it's perps built using looping. So I have like zero doubt they should be building with this. Origami Finance creates vaults. So those are like totally managed, and like, you're protected from like liquidation there. It's all automated, kind of like Yearn, but using looping strategies. So I would imagine they've got to be excited to build with this. And then SUMMER.FI too. We use quite a few looping strategies, or I've used quite a few looping strategies there on SUMMER.FI. But that all said, I think this is a good place, guys, for us to start to wrap up. I think we've covered just about everything here for Euler V2. So I want to remind listeners that they should learn more by going to Euler.finance. They should follow Euler Finance on Twitter or X, and then they should follow Euler_MAB, which stands for Michael's initials. We'll put that all into our show notes so you can easily reference it. You can learn more about the Euler Points program just by going to Euler.finance. Michael, we're rooting for you guys. We're really excited for this V2. I feel like I've gotten smarter just by listening to you in this episode. I really appreciate just the thought that's gone into this. I'm sure it probably wasn't an easy road to start to rebuild, but wow, we need this. DeFi needs this. We need more liquidity in lending and borrowing markets, and we need these sorts of innovations. Like they're more powerful controls. Like I feel like this is what brings that many more folks into the space, especially from traditional finance, and that creates more liquidity and that grows the space and in general. So anyways, just thank you so much for coming on. Any final word for us in terms of getting started with Euler?
There's going to be a lot of blog posts and sort of guides out there coming. It's it's a lot to take on. I mean, there's no getting away from it. It's kind of there's some complexity there, and I hope people will come and explore and learn. Like you said, there's a lot of opportunities here for people to create vaults and to start to innovate. So I really encourage anybody to come forward who's interested in just deploying like the kind of vaults we've talked about today, or innovating and building their own novel vault classes. I think a huge amount of fun that can be had. So just come forward, and we're here to support people. Otherwise, been a great conversation. Thank you very much for having me. Until next time, hopefully it won't be too long if I can come on and give you a demo and show you some of the cool things that have happened.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you're a talented founder or developer, please consider reaching out to our team at fourthrevolution.capital. And for future episodes of the Edge podcast, please check out our link tree at edge_pod.